studying out the parable series, and the series is called Search and Find, and we're looking through parables. And parables are basically simple illustrations that talk about a deeper spiritual lesson. We're reading out of Luke today, and if you're reading through Luke, Luke 13 through 17, where I think Stephen was preaching afterwards, but in that section, it's a great progression. And as I was studying out Luke to prepare for today, I realized that Luke chapter 13 through 17, the theme revolves around who will participate in the kingdom of God. And Jesus shares these parables and these situations and teaches about the things that he's searching for, about who will be part of the kingdom. The section we're going to read today in Luke chapter 18, from Luke 17 through 19, as Jesus approaches the cross, as he approaches giving up his life and sacrificing for us, the theme of his teachings is all about how we respond to the kingdom. And it's so appropriate that Jesus is preparing us for how we will receive the kingdom. There's a great quote that I read in this commentary that says, "The end time destiny of persons is intimately related, even determined by the nature of their faith in the present," right? Which is such a powerful concept, that we are responding to the kingdom of heaven now. Even though the kingdom of heaven in some aspects hasn't come yet, and in many aspects it has come as well. We can talk about that at length at another point, but we're responding to it always right now. Our lives now tell a tale to God of whether or not we really want to be with him when he returns. And I think we have a couple different responses to this. I think one response is to feel upset because we felt like I thought I had more time. I thought I could play now and pay later, right? I think another response is to feel upset because, heaven always seems to cost a lot, right? And it seems to be a lot of work to get to heaven. And God's always reminding me. And yet another response, and a response I think I so often forget, is that in some ways, even though this is a challenge and a warning and a kind of instruction and training, I think I can forget that at the same time as this instruction and warning, it also helps us to see that we can actually experience and appreciate in some small part what it means to be with God in heaven forever. We can experience some of that forever right now, and how we're responding and what kind of faith that we have. So considering those things, let's take a look at Luke chapter 18, verse 9 through 14. Let's see if we can pull out some things from this passage that will help. Let's look at Luke chapter 18, verse 9 through 14. It says in verse 9, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get.' But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.' I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalted themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." This is an interesting passage. Stephen had just read the section of scripture right before this, and this is the second time where Jesus leads in telling us the purpose of this parable. He leads in telling us and warns us, right? And basically it's this warning: don't be confident in your own righteousness, right? Don't look down on others. It's interesting. Sometimes I think you come to church and the preacher starts talking, and sometimes when you hear the message, you can breathe a sigh of relief and think, "Oh, he's not talking about me today," right? And feel relieved. Unfortunately, as you come here today, I'm sorry to break it to you, but I think this applies to a lot of us. And you should probably take out a notebook and take some notes. Let's look at these two characters. But let's take a look and compare what we see in these two people. It's a short passage, a short parable. And one of the things that you see about the Pharisee immediately when you read is that he stands by himself, right? What do you see about the tax collector? He also stands by himself, right? He stands far away from everyone else. The next thing you notice as you compare these two guys is that the Pharisee has satisfaction of self, right? And this is where the difference starts emerging. And the tax collector, he's at a different place. Even though they're both isolated, they're both alone, that's probably the only similarity. The tax collector, on the other hand, he has a deep need for God. And then the differences continue to mount. for the Pharisee, you notice that he leaves actually without justification. Unfortunately, he actually does not, he may not know that, right? But the tax collector leaves justified before God. And of course, if we miss it, the parable rounds off for us and brings it home that if you exalt yourself, you're going to get humbled. And for the tax collector, of course, if you humble yourself, then you get exalted. And you just compare these guys side by side. I think it's interesting to look at the parallel of where we are and which one that we resemble more. I think putting these two characters side by side helped me to evaluate and consider my life a little bit. Which one am I more like? The word confident that he uses, when he warns us and says, don't be confident in your own righteousness. It's actually a word that means several other things. And I think fleshing it out will help us to understand a little bit how to apply this. And in other places in the Bible, it also means to obey. And further, in other places of the Bible, it actually means persuaded. And actually is used in that context many, many, many times. The idea of persuaded also holds the idea of being convinced. Right? You're confident when you are convinced. And I think when you're convinced of your own perspectives, when you're convinced, in like this guy's case, of your own goodness, convinced of your own religion. He's convinced, he's persuaded, he's satisfied. And he actually thanks God. And he's like, thanks God for making me so amazing and not like all these other worthless people. And there's something off about that type of gratitude, isn't it? There's something when you listen to that doesn't sound spiritual, but there's something not good about it. And the idea of being confident in ourselves. What does it look like for us today? Is this something that may challenge our faith? Is this something that we can struggle with? Where do we get our confidence? Where do we get our satisfaction? I want to ask you a question today. What fills you up? What satisfies you? What makes you confident? And I sat down and I thought about a list of things that might possibly satisfy us and might possibly fill us up, if not at least fill up our time, right? We have our jobs, right? And for many of us, we actually may really enjoy our jobs, right? We enjoy not just making the money that we make, but we may also enjoy the type of work and the satisfaction it brings. For some of us, we have no refuge there. We just enjoy the rest. We enjoy relaxation, and we find satisfaction in that. And other of us may find satisfaction in family, still others in grades, still others in statuses, maybe in clubs, in sports, and whatever that it is we participate in higher learning. But as I fleshed out this list, and I thought about it, if push came to shove, I don't know if any one of us would say, I find my satisfaction completely in my work. Right? I don't think any one of us would say, I find my satisfaction completely only in my family and nothing else. I think if we sat down and rationally thought through it, we'd be like, no, of course there's God, of course my priorities in different places. But I think one area where we can find tremendous confidence in is not maybe these things, but maybe how we manage these things. We find, I don't find confidence in my money, but I sure feel confident about how I'm handling it, how I manage the little bit that I have. And I think we can have confidence in the equations of our life. And so I wanted to talk about this first point, and hopefully it's not jarring, but my first point is stop being so full of yourself. I don't know if it was appropriate or not. I Googled it quite a bit to see if it was appropriate. But this literally is what the passage is talking about, right? Don't think so highly of yourself. Don't be so confident in your own righteousness. Don't be so full of what you think you have. I think sometimes there's a risk for us to be full of ourselves, satisfied with our own reasons. I mean, how many times have we got into an argument, then sat there and stewed and reasoned our way out of our frustrations? Like, I'm actually fine. You know what? He can have that. I didn't want it, actually. I feel better. Right? You know what I mean? And we can feel confident and satisfied and exalt ourselves. We can think we're hot stuff, maybe. But the challenge when we're full of ourselves, when we're full of our own reasons, we're full of our own confidence, is that there's no room for Christ. And I think the Pharisee demonstrates this. Filled with his method, filled with his perspective of himself, certain of how he sees everyone else. He went home empty-handed, actually lacking the one thing he came to the temple for, which was his justification before God. Where is our confidence? Where is your confidence? I think there are several examples of things that we can take confidence in, right? I think one of the things that stretches across many of our lives and many areas of our lives is we can take confidence in this equation of life, the this or that method of how we manage things. I think a lot lately, for whatever reason, I've been part of many conversations. And many people have been seeking advice and talking through things about how I can possibly give my best in every situation. And time again in the past couple weeks, I've heard this conversation again and again, right? And I think it's easy to think, well, if I give 50% to this thing, I can only give 50% to that thing, right? Does that make sense? It's kind of an equation of our energy, an equation of our time. Yeah. And we can think, well, that's just how it works. How can I possibly give my best in every situation? It's either family or ministry. It's either marriage or ministry. I'm either going to come in midweek or Bible talk. I'm going to come to this event or that event. And we can create these equations and reason them out like, that makes sense because I only have this much. I'm either going to do great in my grades or I'm going to do well spiritually. One of them is going to have to wait, right? And we can kind of rationalize things this way. I can have fun by myself, or I can be sacrificial, but it's going to be really tough to do both really well. So what do I do? And I think we take confidence in our bargains with the Lord, right? And when we bargain, and I think we create dichotomies, but yet sometimes those aren't the only options, are they? We create an if-then situation, or this or that, but that's not how things always work. I think in some ways we can even take, like I said, confidence in our bargains. And I think one bargaining style is we can say yes to God. Yes, okay, I'll do both. But it's a yes-but system, right? Yeah. Yes, I'll do a 1-year challenge, but only if it's in a subtropical foreign land, right? Why is it that, and if you're unfamiliar with the 1-year challenges, in our culture of our church, a lot of times our campus students or our singles or even different walks of life will take a year off and sacrifice and give it to God. I'm not trying to downplay the 1-year challenge and the culture of that. I think it's great. It's a great opportunity to serve. It's a great opportunity to give your life and to really sacrifice. But why is it that a lot of times when you hear 1-year challenge, it's easily interchanged with vacation, right? I'm going to for my 1-year challenge. I'm going to for my vacation. And it's like, oh, wait, did you say 1-year challenge? You know what I mean? And sometimes there's a yes, but, and we qualify things. I'll sacrifice, but, right? I'm going to Miami for my 1-year challenge. I'm going to the south of France for my 1-year challenge. Yes, I'll change, but not until he changes first. Yes, I'll forgive him, but not until he says he's sorry. Yes, I'll be a Christian, but I don't want to be a part of that ministry because those people, I don't know if I like them. And I think sometimes we can make judgments about us and God and exclude God, the people that are around us and make judgments. But I want you to be careful about how we can look at people, right? Because I think sometimes as we look at people, they can be points. Like if you think about a point that's moving in a direction, we only have so much judgment, but to see that point move in that direction. And sometimes that direction is not a great direction. Sometimes our judgment is right. You know what? That guy's moving in a really bad direction. I don't want to be like him. I don't want to be a part of that. But I think if we're not careful, we make conclusions about directions that aren't final. Because the crazy thing about directions is that we can only see in one direction, but who knows, points can change. They can shift, and God can move them. But we can so easily look down on people and make quick judgments about where they're headed, who they are. We can allow, but then that doesn't even make sense. How do we allow our faith to be affected by someone else's direction? Right? How can we respond that way? And I think you look at the Pharisee and he responded that way. And he responded and he said, well, I'm glad I'm just not like those people. And he compared himself to others. But then you can think about, but sometimes you can find really good reasons to compare yourself to others. Well, at least I'm not like the murderers, right? They're really bad people. Or I'm not like the rapists. They're really, really bad people. Or I'm not like, those who are really low and the real bad sinners. Yeah, at least I'm not like those people, right? And we can find a sense of satisfaction in not reaching a certain rock bottom level in our sin. But at the end of the day, what about you? Aren't we the sinner? And I think we can have the yes, but and bargain with the Lord. And at the end, it's just no in disguise. Yes, but, and we're really just telling God, I'm not going to do that. And the terrible consequence of self-confidence is that it has the risk of distorting truth. And in this Pharisee's case, he looked across the way and it distorted everything he saw in this guy, right? The irony is, if you think about it, if you're a Jew, for him to be an eye shot of the same person meant that they were praying in the same place, which meant they had the same righteousness because you couldn't go to the same places if you didn't. So whether he was a tax collector or not, he was right beside the Pharisee. But yet there was a distorted view of who he was. And ironically, the Pharisee, a teacher of God's message of hope and redemption, was isolated, and he found himself standing alone and separated. And because he had a self-confidence that distorted the truth, he was supposed to be a spiritual doctor, but yet he despised the sick. Right? And he finds himself hanging out with the healthy. I think sometimes if we're not careful, we can be so good at something that it makes everyone else look bad in our eyes. And I think when we find ourselves in that place, it's a dangerous place to be. Instead of having compassion on the man next to him, he despised him and had nothing to do with him. We have to be careful not to be full of ourselves. When we follow our own reasons, when we follow our own confidence, it has risk of leading us astray. We can be so confident of our reasons, so confident of our righteousness. And this has been a hard lesson for me. And I'm just sharing things that I'm learning in my own life. I try to do that on Sundays. I share things about my own life, and hopefully I find a whole bunch of people that are going through the same thing. Some Sundays I find myself standing here alone. I don't know. but I think this has been a challenge for me. And I appreciate the men in my life who have been helping me, because I can be the yes, but kind of guy. And be so agreeable and be like, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, I totally believe in that, but I don't know. That's going to be really hard. And lately, the other day, and it was actually even spreading to people around me, where I was advising a brother who was trying to figure out how to use his time. And I think because I cared a lot about him, I was super protective of him. So I was like, you know what, you actually don't want to make that sacrifice, because then you're going to risk not getting this done, and that's going to affect this other thing, and you got so much in your future looking at it. And I found myself just giving him advice, helping him to really hedge his bets, if you will. And if you're not familiar with that term, hedging your bets is kind of this idea of making a gamble so lacking in risk that you neither make money or lose money, right? That you gain nothing, right? And I found myself just trying to protect him, but then I also found myself thinking, you know what? There's no opportunity for faith here. There's no opportunity for him to find challenge. And as we sat down and talked the second time, I realized, could you do this? He's like, yeah, I could do it, but it's going to be really, really hard. But you think it's possible? Yeah, but it's going to be really, really hard. And I found myself realizing that I had used this yes, but nature with him. And we were making decisions that were faithless, without any risk, without any faith, without any sacrifice. Because and finding satisfaction in the safety of that decision. I don't know about you, but what fills you up? What are things that we're getting our confidence in ourselves? Our confidence is unreliable. At best, it lacks perspective. At worst, it's distorted and inaccurate. What should we take confidence in then? What do we need to be persuaded about? What must we be convinced about? I think, just to wrap us up, we need to be convinced of God. And this is the second half of this passage. I think we have to be careful not to be full of ourselves, and we have to be convinced of God. If there's anything I want you to leave with today, is I want you to be convinced of God. Let's talk a little bit about what this means. How does this relate to the parable? I want you to think about it. What does the tax collector share with God in prayer? Right? He comes to the temple, he stands a far way off, and he says, "Have mercy on me, a sinner." Right? What would make you share that with somebody? Why would you share such a vulnerable thought? Why would you pour your heart out? Who would you bear all your faults to? And it made me think about it. I was like, the only reason I would bear my weaknesses or pour my heart out to somebody is if I knew they loved me. Right? I would lower my guard if I knew they really loved me and I had nothing to fear. Love affords us this type of honesty. Who else would I pour my heart out to? I'd pour my heart out to somebody that I'm confident that they're powerful enough to help me. That I can let them know and they can make a difference. That's who I would tell all my weaknesses to, that I would be vulnerable with. Right? I'll give you an example. Like when you're asking for a raise, you're not going to ask your coworker, right? You're going to ask your boss, right? Because he has the power to actually give you a raise. Right? You're not going to share with someone who's always accusing you. You're going to share with someone who constantly gives you confidence. I think the point of this passage strikes me as I was studying out and reading it is that we need to be convinced of God. We need to be convinced not of our righteousness, not of our reasons, but convinced of God, convinced of His love, convinced of His power. Look at Psalm 33. As I was looking up other passages that God put on my heart as I was studying this out, this passage stood out. It says in Psalm 33, verse 13, "From heaven the Lord looks down and sees all mankind. From his dwelling place he watches all who live on earth. He who forms the hearts of all, who considers everything they do. No king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save. But the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, on those whose hope is in his unfailing love, to deliver them from death and to keep them alive in famine. We wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you." This passage is poetic and it's beautiful, and it's a warning, but at the same time it's a plea from a loving Father. Don't take comfort in this life. Right? The power of war horses, the power of your armies, the power of your savings, the power of your family, the power of your situation, the power of our nation, the power of our politics. These things can't save us. Your degrees, right? Your success, these things can't save us. Your reasons, your confidence can't rescue you. At some point, these things will let you down. But God can deliver satisfaction. Only God can provide the completion that you need. This is what this passage tells me. This is what this parable tells me. And it's this passage tells me, Luke 18 tells me that God knows and he sees. He sees you in your pride. He sees you in your confidence in yourself. He also sees you in your suffering. And he sees you caught up in the rat race. And he knows your dreams. He knows your desires. He sees your good. He sees your sin. And through all that he sees in you, he's willing to do whatever it takes to rescue you and redeem you. Unlike the world, and to be honest, even unlike religion, and I'll have to qualify that at some later point, but there are so many shortcomings to our traditions, to our religion, to how we see things, how we understand things. There's so many shortcomings even here in this church. You've been hurt by somebody in this room right now. Maybe there's someone in here you're not even talking to, you avoid eye contact with. But people will let you down. Even your own dreams will let you down. Love coming from people sometimes will let you down. I've been married for a year and 8 months not quite 8 months, 7 months and 20-something days. I'm not really counting.
Come on, Phat.
And it's interesting because I've been the happiest I've ever been my whole life. It's amazing, right? You can applaud and then look at the face. But as happy as I've been, I've probably been the most hurt I've ever been as well. And unfortunately, when someone holds the strings to your heart, they can lift you up to the highest place and take you down to the lowest place. And with crazy things, sometimes just by not washing dishes or something. I don't know. Not that she would never not wash dishes. Always. But we're going to hurt each other. We're going to disappoint each other. But only God can fill the space. God has made us like puzzle pieces. Right? And we need each other. We're parts of the jigsaw puzzle, But have you ever seen a child try to mash that piece? You're like, hey, you're doing it wrong. It's not working. And we have a part that fits, and someone else in this room fits in, and we fit together as a people. But there's a part that only God can fill. And God desperately cries out. Right? And even in this parable, even as he warns and challenges us with the example of this Pharisee, part of it is a warning because he does not want us to be unjustified. He does not want us to be filled with our own righteousness. He has a special righteousness for us. He has something that he's willing to give his life for you. And when the world is bearing down on you and you feel like there's nowhere else to go, like the tax collector, God sees you. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14, it says, "For Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again." And again, it uses this word convinced. Are you convinced today of God's love? And this is not just a question if you're young in the faith or if you're not a Christian or this is a question for everyone here. We need to be more and more convinced of God's love. Are you able to defend why you love God? Are you able to explain why you read the Bible? Are you able to explain why you pray? You need to be convinced, and your reasons need to be compelling to no one else but yourself.
Yep.
Right? I find that sometimes I get into conversations and we're so quick to defend a political stance, a medical reasoning, an education, but yet when it comes to God, we can be silent. Right? But you would never be that way to your best friend. If someone spoke poorly about your best friend, you would be up in arms. Right? You would never let someone talk smack about your wife or your girlfriend or your brother or your mom or your dad. But yet, can we defend God? Again, not angrily with violence, but with reason. This is why I love God. This is why I do what I do. Right? Are we convinced of His love for us? Right? Convinced, persuaded. No one can argue. I mean, I'm set in this because I know. Right? Or are there so many things that we don't know why we do it, but where we find ourselves day in and day out? Like, why do we come to worship on Sundays? Why do you pray before you eat? Why do you read the Bible in the mornings? Why do you pray? Why do you not have sex before marriage? Why do you not masturbate? Why do you not look at pornography? I mean, is this just stuff that we just don't do because we're Christians? If that's it, you're going to burn out. You're not going to have enough. These reasons will bear down on you, and they'll give way.
That's right. Talk about it.
You've got to be convinced in God's love in order to change. Spend time becoming convinced of God's love. Are the ways you love God compelling to you? Do you have reasons? Articulate them. Why you love God? Or are we in an immature phase where we just really, really like you? You know, like, God, I really, really like you, God. You know, God. But, you know, I don't want to say the L word. You know, I like you. Man, it's got to be more mature than that. Right? And it's not rocket science. And I know there's some Hopkins students in here, and they're like, yeah, I'm glad it's not rocket science. But I think so often, if we're not careful, we're only counting the cost.
Amen.
Does that make sense? We're only looking at what we're losing. Right. The only thing we can defend is what we've given up.
Right.
But how often do we count the blessings?
Come on, Father.
And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think so often it's like we're blaming God. I'm like, well, why don't you do this? Well, you know, this Jesus guy. You know, I would be at the party, but you know, just God. You know? And it sounds like we're blaming God, not honoring Him, not convinced that we love Him. And count the ways that He loves you. Right? That poem says, how I love thee. Let me count the ways. Are we counting the ways with God? Or are we only counting the scars? We've got to be convinced. You've got to be convinced. Right? How can you be convinced of His love? Man, we need help. Because sometimes our own reasons fight against us harder than anyone else's reasons. And you've got to invite people in. I appreciate so much the Cedars who did an amazing lesson several weeks ago or a month ago. And they talked about how, you know what? No one wants to listen to us. Right? And it was like an open invitation to invite them into our lives, to hear the wisdom, to hear the things they had to share. Right? But we've got to invite people in. We've got to invite wisdom in. We've got to take the time to listen, to invite all sorts of people in of all different ages. Or are we people who only learn from certain types? Oh, only the staff person can help me. Only the minister can help me. Only the Bible talk leader. Oh, you're just a regular member. I don't listen to regular members. I mean, but we got to invite people in. There's so much to learn. I love working with the youth in the teen ministry. Even after a night like last night where we were slaving and working so hard, and I thought, you know what, I don't know if I could do this. But then I saw things and I'm like, there's so much to learn about them. There's so much to learn about their energy and the way that they love, the way that they build friendship, the way that they jump on a trampoline mindlessly and have so much fun. There's so much, but seriously, there's so much to learn from the young, from the old, from our peers. We've got to invite people in. We've got to learn to get advice, right? And not only when we're desperate and wrong and there's nothing else we know how to do, but we've got to learn, again, not to get permission, but to get perspective. I want to know. I want to see God in every single way. Show me what else that I'm missing about who God is in this situation. Right? Again, we've got to invite people in. I think we've got to get perspective more clear. There's so many different things that will help us become more convinced. There are retreats where we invest in our relationship with God. There are conferences where we go. And yes, it costs money. And yes, it's a religious, spiritual thing. And yes, in some ways you may think it's optional. Right? But we dare say that our spirituality is the most important thing. But do we invest in it? Do we go to the same number of conferences and retreats for church and for God and for our faith that we go for work? Right? Our boss will say, hey, you got to go to this conference. And we'll be like, oh, man. And we'll start looking up plane tickets. And our church will plan a retreat to help you. And will we sign up and go to invest in our own relationship so we can be more convinced of our love for God? We've got to be more convinced of our love and allow different ways to grow. Convinced of God's power in your life. This is an invitation for everybody. Not just the young, not just the old, not just the new. We've got to take these opportunities to learn about why God loves us so much and how God loves us so much. And taking opportunities to invest in our faith. We've got to be willing to reevaluate what we thought we knew. We've got to be willing to let go of the reasons to doubt. We've got to be a people who search for the reasons to believe and the reasons to love God. I pray that we will be that way. I pray that we'll become more and more convinced of God's love and His power in our life. Amen?
Amen.